Hello, good evening everyone. Welcome to this evening's talk. We just have a few latecomers arriving at the moment, but I think we shall start and admit them as the evening progresses. So thank you for joining us. My name is Michael Pritchard and I'm Director of Education at the Royal Photographic Society. I'd like to welcome you to this evening's RPS event with Paul Hill. We will be recording the event. I first met Paul when I was working on my PhD in the history of photography at De Montfort University in 2007. Paul was teaching there. I felt I already knew him though through his books Dialogue with Photography, which had first appeared in 1979, and through Approaching Photography, which had appeared in 1982. And we're celebrating that book's third edition. I won't give a lengthy introduction other than to say that Paul has been an important figure within British photography since the 1960s, and particularly important to photographic education from the 1970s through the formal polytechnic and university sectors, and informally through his workshops at the Photographer's Place in the Peak District. He continues to run courses for the RPS and on his own account with his partner Maria. The programme for this evening is that Paul will talk about his own career in photography for around 45 minutes or so, and we probably will break that with a short Q&A about his career before Paul will then talk specifically about Approaching Photography and the book itself, at which point we'll then open up for questions for the audience more generally. If you would like to ask a question, please put it in the Zoom chat and it will be relayed to Paul. And we'll get through as many questions as we can for as long as Paul and you are prepared to stay. Well, at least until about 7:15. So thank you. And Paul, I'm going to hand over to you now.
Okay. Right. Wait a minute. My camera off. There we are. I've made an effort, as you see. I'm in front of my birthplace. Actually, the castle is not my birthplace, but it's Ludlow, for those of you with sharp eyes and know that part of the world. Anyway, I'm going to, as Michael said, I'm really delighted to be able to talk about, I'm always delighted to talk about myself, but also to reference Approaching Photography, which is the third edition, which has just come out, because it does incorporate, encapsulate a lot of my own experiences in photography and for the people I've learned so much from as well. So it's really a celebration. I'll talk about that, as Michael said, a little bit more detail, some of the mechanics. And I love the idea that we can have a discussion, you know, these difficult times, so we can have some sort of interchange of ideas, and hopefully I can pass on, you know, some things that you might find interesting. And I can see some old friends amongst the gallery. Thank you, lovely, welcome. Thank you for dropping in. So I will now share the screen. Hopefully this will work. I think Michael will tell me, or someone will not. Is that okay, Michael?
Looking good, Paul. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Fine. Okay. Right. Okay, well, I'll just take the hanging. I love this thing. Hide the floating meeting controls. That is really good, which I have. So I will start off with telling you a little bit about my early pre-photography career, very briefly. I was a reporter, and on a local newspaper, and then that went to I went to work on an evening and daily paper. But I started off as a writer, as a reporter, and this one of the assignments that I had during that period in the early 60s. I started newspapers on a weekly paper in 58 or 59, and was to write about bands, which are called bands now. We used to call them groups. And because I had a little bit of music background, I was in a skiffle group. I was the person who thought you know, they thought I knew what I was talking about. And I used to review records that they came in vinyl, as well as go to concerts. And obviously this one was headlined by the Beatles, and that's me with the rather fetching corduroy jacket. And what's interesting is that the access in those days to the stars was so much easier than I believe it is now, and which is great, because when you're a reporter, you do like to, get face to face to the people who are making the news, and in this case, the people who are making music, and talk about the subject. Right, I'll move on. So I think this might actually explain a little bit about myself as far as my relationship to photography is concerned, because I started off by telling stories, writing stories, and it was very important, that training that instilled in me, having that idea of a picture of in your head of how a story could be told, at the beginning, middle, and end, and to get attention right at the first paragraph, and then to exit with a good end line. And to a certain extent, that has been very much how I've developed as a photographer, I think, through these years. And I moved to photography after being a reporter for a number of years, primarily because I wanted to freelance. I'd married a photographer. We worked on the same newspaper. She was on the picture desk, and it was important, I think, for me anyway, at that particular time, to get out of the rather parochial situation that I found myself in, working for the papers. And so I went to become a freelance, and almost straight away I got a work as a photographer, which is really quite strange. And because Angela, my late wife, was going to do the photographs and I was going to write the stories, but at that time, rather inconveniently, she was having a baby. So I took on this assignment from a Birmingham paper to go down and photograph whatever was happening. It was either a crash or a fire or something. Eventually, of course, I got more technically accomplished. I'm not really a brilliantly technical person in photography, and I was able later on to hone those skills, because strangely enough, I never had to write anymore as far as newspapers are concerned. I was now a fully fledged photographer from 1965 until today. But what I really liked about journalism, to a certain extent, although it's criticized a lot now, journalists are, is that it gives you an opportunity to see how the world works. It gives you, through photography particularly, a visiting card, a way that you can get into places, an excuse actually to nose around. And all of those sort of things fit into my character and personality rather comfortably. So this is one of the best known pictures, I suppose, of that era I was involved in journalism, of Enoch Powell. But it also encapsulates what I'm looking for when I take a picture, wherever it is, whatever area I'm working in, is looking for the unusual. And also, I've always used my photography in some say in combination with publications. That to me, although I've obviously exhibited a lot in galleries, that to me is what I find wonderful about photography, is that it can go into these platforms and these vehicles, and people can see it more easily. If the dissemination is universal, or as universal as you could possibly make it. So my influences at that particular time, I suppose, were, well, I think probably the most important influence was Bill Brandt. When I was working as a freelance, a book came into the Birmingham Post office where I was doing a night shift, and it was Bill Brandt's Shadow of Light. And the book editor came over and said, knowing obviously I was a photographer, and he was quite keen photographer himself, or interested in photography. And he said, what do you think about this? And I said, gosh, this is really, fantastic. I'd seen the odd Bill Brandt photograph in magazines, of course, photographic magazines, but I hadn't seen that sort of compilation of his work. And I was just knocked out by it, and particularly his portraiture and the way they photograph people, as well as his sort of imagination and the fact that he broke rules and it worked with a very chiaroscuro palette and things like that really impressed me. And this, I suppose, is an example of that sort of influence. This is the person I had a photograph of, Cecil King, who was writing some articles for the Financial Times. He was formerly head of IPC, International Publishing Corporation, publishers of Woman Magazine and the Daily Mirror and so on. So I was moving, from the Birmingham papers. Obviously, I'm a Midlander, as I intimated earlier, and into national papers. Obviously the Enoch Powell picture was on the front page of the Observer, but I worked a lot for the Guardian as well as for the Financial Times, which is extraordinary because it's a pink paper. It's not always best showcase for photographs. Anyway, it really got me looking at lots of subject matter I normally wouldn't have done. Because of that, the connection it had with industry and business, obviously. So this was Cecil King. Earlier, I'd been at general election hustings here, and this is Harold Wilson. 1966, and he. This is extraordinary. Now you can't imagine it would happen nowadays. He lit a pipe before he gave a talk or I can't think of the right word. It gave gave an oration, and his speech, that's the right word. I thought the plumes of smoke that made the picture for me. It wasn't that I wanted an accurate representation of what Harold Wilson looked like, because everyone knew what he looked like. I was always looking for something that was a little bit different. Not always were picture editors receptive to that approach. And so a lot of these pictures I'm now showing, apart from the Enoch Powell one, probably never made it into the papers. And the other thing about the newspapers, it fitted into my sort of way of my personality, was that although you're disappointed if it hadn't been used or the way that it was used or misused in the paper, you would always move on to the next day. You couldn't, there's no point, you couldn't dwell on it, because news is fluid all the time. There will be something happening. And working through those publications, newspapers, I eventually in the late 60s started to work for what were called color supplements, color magazines that newspapers started to produce as an addition to their sort of black and white normal dailies or Sundays. This was brought about largely, strangely enough, because of ITV coming along and color television coming along, and there were color advertisements, and so the newspapers were losing out on advertising revenue unless they could sort of combat this. So that's one of the reasons why they started to move into color, because the letterpress made color. I mean, it was awful. The quality was terrible, and so there was no point in pursuing. Can you hear me now, Michael?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. I don't know why that came up.
I can hear you.
Yeah. Oh, good. Good. As long as you can hear me. This new avenue, really, for photographers, new platform outlet, was eagerly sought after by those people who in photography who realize that a single picture doesn't always tell a true and rounded and in-depth story. So a body of work could be shown in these magazines. And if you're involved in journalism or photojournalism, as I was, and documentary, this gave the opportunity for developing a line of narrative, which would be perhaps in more depth and give greater awareness of the story. And this is an example of that. And very often, as a freelance, you put up ideas yourself. And I'd worked quite a lot with gypsy groups. And so I was able occasionally to put forward ideas from meeting some of the groups, some of the individuals, some of the travelers, and they got into these color magazines. In '69, when I was working or freelancing for The Observer, which was one of my main clients, together with The Guardian, and I think one of the reasons why I was really pleased to work for those, and I sought actively to work for them, so I did have an ambition to work for them, was they really respected photography. They used them well, and they were looking also for unusual photographs rather than the normal type of pictures that were in even the sort of traditional broadsheets. They're much more radical in that sense, and you felt that if you were you could say something through your photographs rather than show something. And this is an example of this point that I made this image in Belfast when the British troops first came in 1969, August 1969. And a guy went into the pub and he came out seeing that there's all this razor wire at these crossroads and British squaddies. And so the cruciform, I think, a gesture makes the picture, and it gives a sense of sort of animation. And of course, in those days, as I said earlier, the single picture had to tell the story. And so I was very much aware of this moment in time, this historical moment in time. And what's always interested me is that aspect of photography. Your photographs will be in the archives of the future, and this was brought home to me. Although obviously it's a principle that is most we all know, but and all photographs really will end up in archives one way or another and be poured over in 50, 100 years time, and reveal a great deal as we look at photographs taken in the 19th century and in early 20th century. Now can reveal more and be used in all sorts of ways that I'm sure the photographers never thought they were going to be used. And so this image came up in 2014 when I was asked to write about, one of my best pictures. So the black and white sort of image also gives a patina of age. It's sort of almost built in sort of archival quality to it. It's almost like a piece of archaeology in some senses, because it's so removed, I suppose, from the photographs that we see nowadays, very much in color, and also real life. It separates it away. And I think that sense of a photograph being a document is very, very important to me, in parallel with a picture telling a story, or photography having the potential to create narratives. In the early days of the Photographers Gallery, in the first 12 months, they offered me a show because I had an exhibition in a gallery in Wolverhampton where I was living at the time. And it was the first time that the town's gallery put on a photographic exhibition. So that was really daunting. So I put together what I thought were my personal works, as well as pieces, as well as some work that I've obviously extracted from my editorial work into this exhibition. And I told Sue Davis, who I'd met around 1970 when she was wanting to start the Photographers Gallery in a Lions tea room in Great Newport Street. That I'd got this exhibition, and she invited me to show. It's really quite strange at the moment. We're talking about colour being so prevalent and ubiquitous nowadays. The show that was accompanying my little show, which was in one corner of the gallery in Great Newport Street, was a show of a lot of magazine photographers, people who are quite well known, people like Sarah Moon were in that exhibition as well, and it'd been put together by Ciba, because they were all Cibachromes, which are highly shiny coloured prints all over, and they wanted a vehicle to show this new process, so this new Cibachrome process, which is colour prints from transparencies. And I think my black and white, sort of fairly dark pictures in the corner were quite a relief to many people, but it was really a great opportunity for me to show in London, and I was delighted, because we've been waiting for a photography gallery, in London or in Britain generally, it was wonderful when it started, became a real hub, a real focal point for all photographers and students of photography, and it was international. And I used to go to the openings, and later on when I was teaching, it was very useful to get books for students from their bookshop, which they started also. And this networking that was possible also in photography was extremely important in those days. And there's only the Photographers Gallery, and then the ICA through Bill Jay had the study room, which was also another magnet for photographers, with the exhibitions and, well, more particularly the talks that they gave over the years. One of the things about my career, I suppose, in photography, because I've earned my living through photography since 1965, is being adaptable and using whatever abilities that I have to make a living, to survive. And having had a journalistic background, I was aware of how useful that might be, because I could understand what a good story was, and the components of what a good story should have, but also I was able to write about work. And strangely enough, although I was a freelance, I don't know why this happened, but I got invites to write about my photographs. I didn't sort of say, go to a magazine and I can write about photographs. It was the other way around, and it was nice to be invited to do that and to explain, because there was quite a lot of interest in what was happening in British photography during this era, particularly in the 60s with Bailey and McCullen and people like that. They were appearing on TV shows and so forth. So, and then later on in the 70s with the Photographers Gallery starting, and some photographic programs on television, which I'll talk about, there was a great deal of interest. And so I wrote about what I thought other sorts of photography were incorporating a much more personal approach to the medium. And this is an article I wrote, got an invite to write for this for the RPS Journal, funnily enough. And then, and this is the wrong date, actually. This is 1974. I don't know why I put 1970 on there. That's senior moment there, folks. But I started in 1970, I started teaching. Maybe that's why that's there. And because because my byline had been on some photographs in Guardian, Observer, as I mentioned before, some magazines. And so you get invited to go and talk at local college to students or other groups as well. And as a result of that, I got it, and my friendship with Bill Jay, who was at the time when I worked with him editing Creative Camera. He also worked on the Telegraph magazine. And so I started to do some teaching. And I got involved in helping to start a new course at Trent Polytechnic in connection with the Derby College of Art, and a lot of that period is actually being chronicled in a very good publication which has just come out by May McWilliams, which charts that period in relationship to education, but also other institutions and movements and groupings and so forth are covered in this excellent publication. But photographic education started to become, important to me. I had worked as an outdoor pursuit instructor up in Snowdonia earlier, and so I suppose there was that, maybe that's why I rather like the idea of passing on skills and information and so forth to younger people. And so as my involvement with photographic education developed, one of the things that we should discuss, and I was offered a full-time job in '74, amongst ourselves as not only photographic educators and lecturers, but also we were exhibiting and so forth. I worked with people like Raymond Moore and Tom Cooper, John Blakemore, Richard Sadler, and several other people who really I learned a lot from, because I was fairly new coming from newspapers into teaching. And I didn't know how, you taught photography, but it was rather good. That naivety was rather good because although they brought me in to talk about social documentation and photojournalism, I realized what was going on, what were amongst the project, with some of the projects the students were doing. It had come from perhaps a foundation course on art or art qualification, and they were coming on. They were thinking about photography in a very different way. Many of them, the way that perhaps I was thinking about it. Anyway, it struck us at the time that there was a large audience out there of people who were interested in what was termed independent photography, personal work, taking their projects, what they wanted to say through their photographs, so they wanted to develop. They weren't just thinking photography is a vocational, career. It wasn't just applied. It could be a standalone art form. And so it occurred to me, that we should run some workshops during the summer period, because working full time as I've been since I was about 17, and seeing that during the summer there was nothing going on at the Polytechnic in the rooms in the photographic department and so forth, I thought, well, why don't we run a summer school? So in conjunction with a suggestion that was made by the guy I was working with at the time, and it was a course leader, Bill Gaskins, and I'd got involved with the Society for Photographic Education as well. That's another story, but so we thought, oh, right, we'll do one here at Trent Polytechnic in Nottingham, and so we did a couple of them, and that they seemed to go very well, because there were lecturers who really wanted to, particularly lecturers aimed more at educators, who wanted to know what this personal photography, if you like, was about. But it also occurred to me that there was another sort of potential audience outside the educational sector who might want to see how people work, people who they may have admired, people who were exhibiting, people who were getting monographs published, although there wasn't a lot of that in those days in the 70s. And so with my wife Angela, we set up the Photographer's Place in 1976. And I was still working, at Trent Polytechnic, so I could only do it at like Easter and, doing a couple of workshops in the summer. And that was very successful. And then it went on for 20 years. And we brought all sorts of people in. This is an article that was written in AP in 1985 about it. And these are some of the people who led, who were the workshop leaders. From Edward Weston's son Cole, and Paul Caponigo was one of our early workshop leaders, a great character, wonderful photographer. He was in 1978. So in that year, I decided that I would give up my work as a full-time lecturer at Trent Polytechnic. By this time I was course leader, and it was a real wrench to go away, but there are reasons that I did it. And that I think I made a good choice to develop the workshop idea and philosophy. And we were the first workshop, or certainly residential workshop, in the UK, probably one of the first in Europe, and where I am now, in fact, speaking to you from a small village in Derbyshire, in the Peak District. And this is sorry about that. This is a later workshop after we started in 78. No, these are 1980s. Lewis Bolts, I've got Lewis Bolts to come over, great character, no longer with us, sadly, American photographer, new topographics. And on the left is our two Manchester Polytechnic alumni, Brian Griffin and Martin Parr, who also ran a workshop. So there were sort of many more. One of our favorites, very popular, was Faye Godwin, who you can see in the middle of that picture. And what was really good, we were able to use the landscape and to take groups out. So we used to go out, although all workshops certainly weren't landscape orientated. It was we live in a very interesting and beautiful landscape. So, you know, if we go on field trips to take pictures, have a picnic, go and have cream teas, whatever it is, part of that human experience is so important, as well as the teaching. And because of that, there was an interest, actually, I found this only today or yesterday, in what we were doing. Because being a pioneer, I suppose, in this area, people take notice, and I'd written 1 or 2 articles, and people had written articles about the workshops, and the BBC got interested. And they were doing a series called Exploring Photography, which emerged, funnily enough, after a program, the producer called Peter Riding of Arena on the BBC. Tom Cooper and I did, with David Hearn, did a program on photography for Arena, and I sent him some ideas that I think there should be a series of photography, serious series, rather than a hobbyist, you know, type approach to photography. And eventually the series on the BBC called Exploring Photography emerged. And you can see that's a postcard on the left-hand side from the dear Peter Turner, who was editor of Creative Camera at a particular time. He'd stuck a little thing on it, which had obviously come from the Evening Standard or something like that. And I think the amusing thing from his point of view was it said that Bryn Campbell and I will journey to the wilder shores of semiology in the last of the series. Never thought of it quite like that. That's Brian Clark on the right-hand side, well-known painter, artist, worked a lot with Norman Foster. On the left is Andy Earle, who became a very well-known music photographer and the music scene, worked a lot with Malcolm McLaren. And that's me with a rather fetching jumper. Again, the things were moving in the 70s, most important decade, I think, of British photography and the 20th century. And one of the things that emerged, I was I was part of an advisory committee on photography at the Arts Council. And what emerged at one meeting was that there should be a biannual show of photography at the Art Council's prestigious Hayward Gallery, so the gallery on the South Bank that they ran. And so what emerged, much to my surprise, was that I was asked to be one of the selectors for this big show with John Tagg and Angela Kelly. So I think that was 79. So that was very important for me, and because I got, you know, I'm very much aware of about curating, about contextualizing work for the public, obviously I've been teaching, so I knew about these things to a certain degree, but it's another thing to know in theory about these things. But in practice, it became really, really interesting and stimulating. And to do it at this prestigious place was really frightening. My first proper curatorial appointment. What in the meantime I'd been doing with Tom Cooper, primarily we did them for an archive or an access or research for our students, so that they could access what we were doing, and we made tape recordings, audio recordings of people we thought were important movers and shakers of world photography, and which became Dialogue with Photography, which is still in print actually. But it came out in 79, so it's over 40 years it's been in print, and you can see some of the people that we interviewed over the years, which is another interesting topic in itself. But why I think this is important, as in fact the teaching was, that I was working with some really bright people who were much better, qualified to a certain extent, certainly educationally, than me in photography. I learned so much from them, particularly the people who came over from America to work on our course in Nottingham and Derby. People like John Mulvaney and Tom Cooper, and also by going and interviewing some of the movers and shakers, I learned so much from their own life experiences and their attitudes towards photography, which really informed and influenced me greatly. Because of the workshops being quite successful, a lot of people said, well, why don't we start something similar? Or we want to keep that impetus going, and so because we had regular workshop attendees, and one particular person called Janet Hall, in conjunction with Virginia Curry, decided that they maybe something in London should be created, and they created London Independent Photography. And it's about 35 years ago, I think now, and it's still going with the magazine, annual show, and so on, and workshops, which is great. But that emerged from the workshops that they'd attended up here in Derbyshire. And when we had a meeting to form LIP in the Photographers Gallery, it was really very full. You could tell the moment was right. When the moments are right, because the people who attended were spilling out onto Great Newport Street. And I chaired it, and we formulated some way of program or way of running it, and took lots of information from the people who attended that first inaugural meeting, and that's what emerged. Also, I was exhibiting. I was moving from journalism to something I'm just going to talk about shortly. A project I did earlier in the 70s into photographing around where I lived here in the Peak District, and went as a spread in Creative Camera, which is very influential magazine, as I'm sure a lot of you know. And sadly, it's no longer exists. And I think that was one of the fountainheads really for us, where we could see what was going on as if you like, thinking photographers, for want of a better phrase. Sounds very pompous to say that, and but it was there was a groundswell really of interest in photography as self-expression, as photography as a standalone art form. And we, through various groups that formed at that particular time, there was a general movement, didn't always agree with each other, but one of the things that we all agreed on was how influential Creative Camera was in terms of help, being like sort of an oasis at the time, in an arid desert. And they obviously living here up in the landscape, this is typical sort of work that I was doing that particular time, which eventually became a book called White Peak, Dark Peak. What interested me from going from the sort of very chiaroscuro work, which I'll talk about in a minute, of using light and a much more graphic work in black and white, I was thinking of a much more muted tonal range, although this isn't a particularly good example of that. This is one of the few pictures where there is strong sort of light in the picture. There is a graphic quality to this, and we use that obviously on the cover. But most pictures are much more around a sort of middle range. And what interested me was the bones of the landscape. That's what I was thinking about, and I photographed mostly during sort of autumn and winter time, so that you can actually see there's more like a physical body, and that's what really interests me, as well as the walls and the trails and the tracks and so forth. And what I think it signifies is that I was interested in mark making, photography being a mark making medium. That is so important to me, and I think that is what I always sort of go on about. That's what it is. You know, the marks that are made either by silver halides or by pixels, you know, on, you know, the image, you know, that's what the images consists of. And I think to be aware of that, as well as other factors I'll talk about in a moment, is what motivated me a great deal. And again, using, you know, that adaptability that I think, and to be able to keep going through writing and photographing and teaching, enriches your life a little bit more, because if you're waiting for the phone call, if you're waiting for an exhibition, if you're just a photographer, I couldn't do that. You know, it would drive me mad to rely on other people. I've got to be much more proactive if I possibly can. So I react to, you know, an invitation to write something, you know, about, in this case, about landscape. Which I'm, you know, quite happy to do, especially nowadays with the digital age and now me using an iPhone. But you know, these particular examples that I'm giving you of how my career has evolved, it probably wouldn't, you couldn't think about it in the way that I thought about it, or it evolved for me nowadays, because there's so much being set up that is different to what it was in those days. We were making it up as we went along. And one of the things that happened was that when I started to run an MA at the Montfort University in Leicester, I did it along sort of workshop lines, in a sense, because people were part-timers and they were coming in, they were mature, they were offering themselves, they were bringing something to the party, and it was just a matter of directing that interest and honing it, that really, I think, was important to me in photography, rather than, you know, having a very set sort of curriculum. And two of the people who were on that course, Martin Shakeshaft and Nick Lockett, actually said to me, well, after 20 years of doing the workshops and giving them up in the mid-90s to start this MA at Montfort University, you know, why don't you do workshops again? And this actually followed the sad death of my wife. So I said, yeah, this is great. So this is, you know, one of the reasons why I'm still doing workshops, and with Martin and Nick, but also with Maria Falconer, and as well as with the RPS, and so it's really, you know, it's really good. And we in fact have a workshop tomorrow with a couple of places on it, if anyone's interested. So that keeps me alive. It keeps me interested in what's going on, because I have to prepare myself for such occasions. But what is really interesting is what is really interesting in teaching in institutions, higher education institutions, whether it be at a sort of diploma or BA level or MA level, or even PhDs, you're meeting different people, you're meeting different personalities. And that sense of my interest in other people is really, what they're doing and their ideas is really, I find, very stimulating. And because people are unique, everyone's unique, and my role, I always think it as a facilitator, is actually to try and make that individuality real in the terms of the photographic work that they produce, and what they're trying, and to help them say something with their images. So these are some of the so when we revived the Photographer's Place, after it had been sort of dormant for since when we finished 96 and started up in 2010. And there's Nick with the big camera, and and Martin in front of him, and that's at Ilam Hall, where we sometimes do workshops. And this is a workshop that I was doing in 2012 for LIP. So the connections are still there. And what is really good, that those organizations that started and evolved from this particular period in the 70s and the 80s are still going and still flourishing. They have their ups and downs like everything else, but which is really good to know that something that, you know, a germ of an idea that started in a small village in Derbyshire has grown and has flourished. Before I finish this bit, I cannot pass it without sort of mentioning my late wife Angela, and this is a piece that I did for a book which was came out in 2010, or Corridor of Uncertainty. Angela died in 2006. And this is a piece that I put together of Polaroid pictures, looking straight at the sun and noticing that the sun was rendered in the Polaroid, or it was actually a Fuji Instax, as a green shape. So I put these Polaroids actually on a black and white photograph of her, which is was taken about, not by me, but by one of her photographic colleagues when she worked in the studio, which she was like when I first met her. And this book really was one of the recent bodies of work that I put together. I've done others obviously since that, but I think it was very important. The other book, White Beak, Dark Beak, was done with Corner House, which was then run by Dowie Lewis, and then he set up his own publishing company. And Dowie published this book in 2010. Of course, I'm a big postulator for photography and how important it is, how essential it is to our everyday life nowadays, and certainly now with of the iPhone and digitization and the whole world of photography has changed, but a lot, as I'll talk about in a moment, is very much the same as when I did my first book, and called my first edition, the first edition of Approaching Photography. And this is the National Photography Symposium. And this is another organization, Red Eye, that started. I did the first, I did the first talk for Red Eye in Manchester, and that's an organization, a very good one, that is flourishing and still around today, and long way it stay so, and it moved into other areas as well. So I love to support initiatives that I think are really run by good people with good intentions. But one of the things about the new technology that I refer to is that obviously I was a bit of a late comer to color, which is strange. And this is a picture of my dog that I took. But I've always had an idea. I've always wanted to experiment. I've always wanted to take a different approach to a normal photographic practice. I think you learn a lot by mistakes. You learn a lot by the accidents rather than something that you've worked out and calculated how it's going to turn out, because that really means that it's already been taken. And that seems to, sometimes it's okay for commercial work because that's what people want to a certain extent. But if you're trying to explore photography and express things through photography, you learn by making, I think, mistakes. But my late, entry into color was accelerated from the 90s, and certainly with iPhones. And and I will talk about that a particular relationship to the book. But I think it has, I mean, because now you photograph, where you are, or you can photograph where you are, not necessarily where you'd like to be. And I think that's, so important that you go out with a phone, and you've got a phone and you've got a camera as well. But color, there are certain things that I suppose we're all, that are within my DNA, photographically speaking, looking for marks, looking for different angles on things, being very conscious of vantage point and the frame, and of course light. So I would just go through a body of work that I produced between 1973 and 1978. Called Pre-Notations, and this is quite I'll go through it fairly quickly, otherwise we'll be here all night. But I think it just gives you an example here of how I'm trying to evolve a sort of a narrative, and linking things, repeating motifs like light here and shapes. And this work, I suppose, was with one of the projects and bodies of work that I'm best known for, because it does incorporate those things that I think are so important, things I only think about if I'm going to think about anything going out when taking pictures, is I think about sort of three things, and that's light, frame, and vantage point. And so this work, I think, is exemplifies that, and I think also is an indication of how my mind thinks about linking things together, and how to, and also breaking a few rules, splitting the frame into two halves here, things that are being slightly obscured, things that are bringing photography to the foreground. The photograph becomes a vital part of this image. And here, this is an example of light in terms of the socks, vantage point, to give the sort of sense of ambiguity here of a flat object, as it were, but it's made vertical by the way that you're taking certain reference points away, and the feet almost appear to be touching the road below. And this, these images that have a life outside the context of when you took them, when you made them. And they go into exhibitions, they have a life. It's like giving birth, they have a life after you have, and this is a interesting reason why I've got two copies of that here, is that people, there's a series actually here on The Guardian that somebody saw this picture in exhibition and wanted to know who the person was who I photographed, and it happened to be my daughter, who was then interviewed. So, it's really nice that photographs have this sort of longevity. So this century, I've been going back to journalism, do a little bit of photojournalism with Maria when we did the photograph, this is in the Photographic Journal, RPS Photographic Journal, when we went to work in refugee camps in Lesvos and on the Macedonian border of Greece in 2016. So I think what photography does right at the beginning, it exposes you to, if you take the opportunity, to what is happening in the world, the politics, the social mores, and all of the things that I think makes us human. And if you're curious, if you really want to find out about things, the camera is a wonderful excuse. It's a wonderful tool also to chronicle and record and to express. And I was very pleased to be also involved here, thinking, because of my knowledge of the media, I realized that these people who'd been stopped from going across the border on the Macedonia border would be able to get somewhere if I led them to the border. That's what they wanted. They wanted someone. And of course, if you're a volunteer, you know, you have the opportunity to put your high vis jacket on and be a sort of authority figure. And so, but I knew that the media, by watching what was going on, they want something that's actually active, and if you have a demonstration or if you have a march, then the media will take notice, and as a consequence of that, these people were interviewed and on television around the world, and their plight was recorded, and also referring to new media as we were earlier, I was able to tell those stories by using Facebook and getting them out and using it, editing the stuff and getting, you know, and obviously getting feedback from people as well. It's a two-way traffic. So I always think, you know, I don't look down on Facebook. To me, it's just another platform. You know, it's, you know, nothing's perfect, but it is a way of getting your work out, and that's so important to me. What's the point in making work unless it's going to get out? And that's one of the reasons why I'm a big enthusiast, not only of a phone camera, but also of social media. So recently we're now in this awful position, and how do we work in a time of restrictions and isolation and so forth. And so I've taken my isolation because I get my news about the pandemic through the television, and I've been photographing people, pundits and so on, who I've been talking about, politicians, scientists, doctors and nurses and so on, and members of the public talking about COVID, and also through this medium that we're using now, through a laptop and with a camera in it. And it's quite interesting not only to see what people's interiors are like, but also to see how people have become had to become adept at using in their own homes, under their own steam, very often, a way of getting their image out. And they get their image out through a camera, albeit embedded in a laptop. So photography and a camera, you know, all those things that we're talking about and all the reasons why you're probably members and listening to this is because you're an enthusiast and a devotee to camera vision and to doing things with a camera and through your photography. And, you know, it is around us all the time. Photographs can be taken where you are rather than where you'd like to be. It's all right, I haven't expired. So I'll stop sharing. So I'm just going to talk now after any questions, just briefly about the genesis of approaching photography and some of the things mechanically, if you like, aesthetically, decisions I've had to make regarding the book and incorporating ideas about understanding photographs into a book form. Michael, have any questions?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Thanks so much for sharing that with us. I mean, that was a fantastic overview of 50 years of your career, I think, isn't it? So I wanted to, I'm not going to talk so much about your past, because I think you've done that very well indeed. And I think my questions on that can wait. But what I wanted to do was just bring it back to approaching photography and just ask a couple of questions. We're a little bit short of time, so I'll just do it briefly, but I'd like to, just wondered if you could talk a little bit about how you moved from dialogue with photography from 79 to approaching photography in 1982, and what made you want to produce approaching photography?
Well, yeah, I was going to talk about that, but I will talk about it now. The genesis, as I call it, it came as a result of a meeting organized by Focal Press, the publishers, who are the biggest publishers of photographic books in Europe at that particular time. And they were aware, I think the production editor was aware that there were things happening in British photographic education in the 70s that were different to what had gone before. The industry had changed. There was a lot of freelancers now. There were some new photographic courses starting. There was the Photographer's Gallery. There were workshops starting. There were, as I said, the courses were getting interested in photography as an art form, as a self-expressive medium. And the Arts Council had got a committee that was awarding grants. So they thought, oh, we better get up to speed on this. So they got some lecturers in. I think there's Mike Langford from the RCA, and I think it was Adrian Munsey from LCP, as I recall, and maybe one or two other people I can't remember, but who may be teaching A-level. And we all thought there should be something about understanding photographs, photography, the ideas behind photographs, because photography is about ideas at the end of the day. And so what surprised me was that the consensus of this small committee, about half a dozen people, advisors, that I was the one that was asked to do it. And it could have been because I just finished teaching at Trent Poly, and I was running the workshops, developing the workshops here in Derbyshire, and I'd also been this curator of this, one of the curators for this exhibition at Hayward. Maybe there was a conjunction of things where, I was in the right place at the right time. Anyway, so I thought, that's interesting. I will briefly show you about that unless you want, if you want to ask me a question, I can talk about it.
Yeah, we'll come
show
back.
show the slides. But if there's another question,
yeah, I mean, it sounds like from what you say, there was nothing else really around like this when this came out. Because I mean, my recollection is, and I have to admit, I was very young in that period, in the late 70s, early 80s. But I remember lots of technical books, and I mean, even Michael Langford's own series about basic photography were much more focused on the. Well, I think they were much more focused on the sort of mechanics and the practicalities of photography rather than going into the image. Is that a fair assumption?
Yes, absolutely. And that was the reason why they wanted something that was dealing with about the ideas and about understanding photographs that were being produced at that particular time. But generally speaking, it was, and I never thought of it, but David Bate, who was a friend, said, that book is a book on theory. I never thought of it as being a sort of theoretical book, but because it was about ideas, it was about, the ideas behind why people do what they do in photography. And that's what we were teaching. We were teaching various areas of practice. What I didn't want to do was to turn it into some sort of usual list of categories. I wanted to deal with approaches to photography rather than compartmentalize it.
I'm just going to ask one final question then about the book before I let you talk about that in slightly more detail, and then we'll open up the questions to our rather wonderful audience. The first edition then came out in 1982, and this has just been released late last year. How has that book evolved over that intervening period? Because it's been a dramatic change for photography.
Well, if I may, I will screen share and take on board that unless there's another question.
Oh, that sounds perfect. In that case, Paul, I'll hand back to you.
Yeah, okay. Right. Okay, is that up, Mike?
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you. Right. So the genesis of that is I've just explained how that happened with Focal Press. And then when I got this invitation, this is it. What the hell, what do I do now? So as I said, I took off to a quiet room with a notebook, typewriter, chocolate digestive biscuits, and copious cups of tea. And I think what you do, I didn't make a mind map at the time because I don't think mind maps existed in those days. But I took this picture with off a whiteboard, actually, Salford University in 2015, where I did some teaching recently, and it seemed to really sum up, I suppose, what is fine art photography. And it was a similar sort of thing, but I did it in a slightly different way. I did it with a series of cards, and I had some thoughts. I did the sort of stream of consciousness type an essay to start off, just to get myself going, just to get things out there as if I was writing an article about what I wanted to do. And as a result of that, other ways of doing it evolved and came a lot easier. And this is the book in '82 that I was referring to, and its incarnation in 2004, which is the second edition. And I'll talk a bit about how I did it. What I was thinking in the '82, it was all in black and white. That's important to say. There was a little bit of color in 2004, but very little, because they wanted to do more or less a reproduction of the original '82 book at Photographers Institute Press, which was Guild of Master Craftsmen, the publishers. They tended to do how to do books. Anyway, I had these cards when I went out for walks or came back and thinking about it. I wrote something on a little postcard, plain index card, and then it might be a phrase, it might be a bit of information, a quote, or whatever it was. And then I'd spread these postcards or these cards, index cards, out onto the tabletop or the carpet, and try and work out a sort of a form, a chronology, a way that that I could evolve and develop different aspects. And what struck me straight away, well, there are two things. One, I wanted to do something different. I just didn't want to take the normal route where you put landscape in one chapter, journalism into another, nudes into another, whatever. I wanted to. I just realized that by thinking about it and writing about this initial sort of essay that I wrote to myself, was that the subject, what you point your camera at, is almost neutral. Okay, so it's very important in certain circumstances, but there are so many different ways of taking a portrait, photographing a hillside, photographing a street, whatever it may be, as well as the different practices in photography, from photojournalism, to fine art. And the other idea, of course, was that I wanted to do was to have the book that was available for primarily for students of any age, not only people doing A levels, but people who were just getting time to think about seriously about photography in their retirement or whatever it is. People who were students in the formal and informal sense. And so I wanted to make it accessible. I wanted to use whatever experience I had in journalism to get the tone right. Not saying I did it in the first edition, but never mind, I changed that in the second edition. And to really think about the reader who was reading this book. And it was like I was talking to somebody. That was very important. So I thought, well, and the first edition came out, and I looked at, it was, I was quite happy with it. I wasn't too happy with the printing. It was printed a bit too dark, but that's, you always look for the blemishes, but it had all the content that I wanted it to have. Like everything else we do, it could have been a bit better. But what I think was interesting also was how it was received. And Focal Press, were well known. So they were sending out their review copies to various publications. And there was some nice stuff mentioned, Amateur Photographer and the Royal Photographic Journal, Society Journal, and so on. And then I got the copy of a relatively new magazine that came out called 10/8. It was sort of left of center. And I actually had a little bit of a connection with it because I was on a committee in the West Midlands Arts Council committee that actually awarded their first grant to get the actual magazine going. And I looked at this and I thought, the review is actually next to a revised, an enlarged edition of Beaumont Newell's History of Photography, something that I'd really admired, and I'd met Beaumont and really liked him a lot, and loved the book, loved the way he'd written about photography and so forth. So I thought, to be on a review page next to next to Beaumont's really great. And anyway, as I went through this crit on my book, I realized it was done in a very peculiar way, a very peculiar angle, and it was a non de plume. There's nobody called Will Moore that you can see. And this is the second paragraph that I came to. And, you know, this is it. So really, you know, talk about bad reviews. That was quite devastating. Although it was so vitriolic, it was almost, you know, the hyperbole was really, which it was made it somehow less affecting to me, because it was I just couldn't believe that anyone could have this amount of vitriol. If you ever see it, you read it, it is a real demolition job. But thankfully I'd seen one or two more favorable ones before, and I don't necessarily think that anyway, I was obviously upset by it, but you move on. So anyway, this thing about evolving, about the initially about those getting those ideas, those cards into some sort of idea, I realized that I have to have chapters, and so I just thought about how can I make an interest. I was thinking of chapters like a headline, you know, so to attract attention, and I would like, and that was important to me. And obviously these chapters, or the headings and the emphasis, changed particularly. I mean, for a start, in the 82 edition I had something on community photography, which doesn't exist in, or that phrase doesn't seem to exist in photography now, but it was very big in the 60s. And so with the 2021 edition, the current one, I wanted those each chapter to catch the eye visually as well. So there would be a picture as well as the chapter title to be enticing. The preface had to contextualize the book, in the sense that I wanted to say that so much has changed. What Michael has referred to as everything had changed, but a lot of things were very much the same as well. You're making images, you're using photography to say something as well as to show something. And this is an example in the preface, using the iPhone, my iPhone. I photographed this butterfly and photographed something in the daytime and something at night, which is much more expressive, dealing with shadows. But neither of those things would have been possible even with a reasonably sophisticated SLR with film when I did the first edition. And so, but it did actually tell you things, whichever era photographs are made, there are two things that photography, basic things, it does many things, but two of the basic things that I wanted to concentrate on really as well, or to say at this point at the beginning, was that photography records and it expresses. No other medium probably has that sort of duality. So in terms of the mechanics of the book, I wanted a squarish book format, because then it could actually incorporate uprights and landscape. And also I wanted at the beginning to show accessible pictures. When I was talking about thinking and seeing photographically in the first chapter, I wanted to the same type of subject matter taken with something unusual. A loving couple, you know, it's okay, you can take many pictures of loving couples, which people say, oh, isn't that, you know, but if they're doing something unusual, having a cuddle when it's pissing down with rain, it catches the eye. And also the other couple in the bottom picture, when their wedding pictures were taken, the photographer wanted to get something different. Oh, let's have a toast in champagne, but the bride says, oh, I'll finish it off. And so that becomes quite interesting, as well as, you know, the things that are happening, the swan in the right hand side, the mechanics of in terms of camera vision, the idea of the frame, what you're doing, the basic idea of photography, using the frame to make the picture, is what you incorporate in. It's very subjective act, so that was very important to use an illustration. So it was those sort of ideas. It wasn't, you know, hyperfocal length, how to calculate it type of book. It was, you know, it's very simple. Anybody can do it with an iPhone or a 10.8 camera. They still have to put things and be aware of and responsible for what is in that frame. And certain other mechanical things that about photography I wanted to incorporate, blown out highlights in color. So I wanted to incorporate what I'd done in the earlier editions in black and white, because people still are photographing in black and white. There is a resurgence of interest in film. So, and historically, you have to reference, where photography has been, to know where it is now, then to even to postulate about where it may go in the future. So these are the sort of things I want to do. So something like that on the right-hand picture, you get as a negative, but then when you manipulate it, it becomes what it really is. So there's that sort of pre and post-production and pre and post visualization that I, was interested in putting over as part of the process. And how you disseminate, how you put pictures together became important in a sequence or a series, in a photo essay, and so forth. And so all of these things I incorporated as much as I could, and bringing color into it. There was virtually no color in the second edition, certainly none in the first edition, and there's about 40%, if not 50%, of color in this third edition. So that's so important because everyone photographs in color nowadays primarily, and so I wanted to reflect that. I wanted to show about mixed media, how post-production is important, how you can do things in photography nowadays that you certainly couldn't have done just a few years ago, but the photographs are real, like this picture of Mandy Barker's here, dealing with plastic and pollution, and a real but it's a political statement. There's aesthetics here. You have to have aesthetics to attract you to that political story, that environmental catastrophe that she's trying to make us aware of. And in the picture above, they're using a series of pictures and objects that have been put together by somebody who's talking about the loss of his father. So that's expressing a very human thing, and how that can be used, as well as the fake that is used in photography, like that picture below, which is about somebody saying that this was made just before a plane went into the Twin Towers. And I addressed certain things I didn't address in the first book, like photo murals, talk about posters and today and how that is done, and putting pictures together, directing. There's a directorial sort of way of making pictures. Now, it's always been there, of course, but making triptychs on the right hand side. These two pieces of work by Nick Lockett and Martin Shakeshaft, and so, this is it's a broad, these aren't the sort of sequences that they're in the book, but just giving examples here. And I wanted to use the also that you could dip in and dip out of the book. That was quite important, so that you didn't have to read it from the beginning to the end to get any sense of it. Each chapter was self-contained and had all the things that you probably might want, from dealing with particular areas like portraiture or landscape or so forth. But I called them something differently, but also had these hanging quotes from the book, which also meant you could dip in. The captions were very important. The captions also told a story. So that idea, bringing, I suppose, from my journalistic background, that I wanted the thing to, the book to be very accessible and also look okay. And I was very helped, very good editor, Jen Venel, who helped me put this book together. They don't have designers anymore in quite the same way they used to have when I did the 82 edition. And as the author, you're much more involved in the aesthetics of the book, which I rather like that idea. It's more time consuming, but at the same time, I think it was a learning curve for me. Here, dealing with different of the man-made landscape instead of dealing with landscape as the sort of the grand vista. Obviously, I dealt with that as well, but to bring out sort of issues about how the landscape or a genre can be interpreted rather than the traditional. And here, talk about Facebook on the left-hand side, how that can be used. I referenced that. It's difficult to make reference to everything in these things, and a poster I did in the 82 edition that Vic Bergen had done, and one that UKIP had used, up there about, about the hordes that were coming over, and about propaganda and fascistic sort of methods, if you like, that are being used, that photography can be used for. This, in fact, is the final image, so it's probably a good opportunity to actually bring all those sort of ideas together, although they must have been very confusing for you to take on board in this sort of rather rush through sort of section. But I think it's important. What I wrote with this, wrote to accompany this image, which was, although it may not seem so, this image made at twilight with a mobile phone camera in Berlin encapsulates many of the unique attributes of photography. There is the ambiguity of the juxtapositioning of wall and poster site, graffiti and animal face. Are they all literally on the same plane? There is a sense of play and cheekiness created by the way the photographer frames these diverse visual elements. It is also mysterious and enigmatic, as we are not in full command of the facts, and it does not conform to a conventional city view. It engages our attention because it exhibits the medium's duality, i.e., it is of something as well as about something. It is also, as much as we can tell, taken at a real location with a history. Who lives there? Who built the wall? Who painted the graffiti? Does the graffiti signify anything? As it is Berlin, this information is pretty obvious to recent generations, but will it be so in 100 years' time? The wall has not got much light on it, but the marks stand out well enough. However, it is still a bit somber. The brightly lit poster over the wall is amusing and vibrant. The grass seems greener on the other side, a metaphor for the 20th century, or a bit of fun. You decide.
Thank you, Paul. That was fantastic. Really, really interesting to hear some of how that book came about and how you approached bringing it all together. We've got a couple of questions already from people. We've got probably another 5 or so minutes, I'm afraid. Yeah. But it's probably better that you heard Paul talk than me. So I'm going to ask the first question on behalf of Alan Leonard. So Alan's asking, do you have any ethical considerations when you led migrants forward, the challenge between documenting and participating?
Absolutely none. You deal with whatever, you're a human being first and a photographer second, I suppose, is a sort of cliched answer to that. But I felt that there was a great injustice being actually perpetrated. And it seemed that my knowledge of the media was the important experience and skill that I could utilize in this situation rather than taking a photograph.
Okay. And Liz Henry is referring to the new lockdown rules that Scotland's First Minister has said that unless it's for an essential purpose, we have not to leave home, yet her camera has been a lifeline during lockdown. What do you think about this?
Well, yeah, I think I quite agree. And I think not only can you read interesting books on photography, but you can actually use, as I have, used the camera to photograph what is happening around me. In my case, it's the talking heads. It's people talking about COVID and all the stuff, the information that is being, and how they are using a camera in their laptop to communicate with us and tell us what is happening when a lot of the time we're seeing things happening, but we are also victims and of a silent enemy. And so to have something positive to do in situations like this is a real boon, because it does help, I think, us survive much better.
And Mark is saying that he started a MA in July and learning to think conceptually, metaphorically for pretty much the first time, while hugely interesting and rewarding, is also challenging. And sometimes I find it hard to totally open myself to this wildly different approach. I appreciate that this will become easier with time, and arguably it already is. However, do you have any basic advice or tips which you found helped you?
Yes, I think a phrase might help. We, as photographers, look for photographs. We're hunters to a certain degree, but also you should always remember that you're also a victim as well as a hunter. So if your life, you are unique, there's nobody else like you. Why cannot that be the subject matter? Which part you take from looking at your old family albums when you were a kid to actually realizing that your mood is bringing about the making of certain types of imagery, which maybe you didn't realize they were. And I had this conversation with Faye Godwin, who had suffered from cancer and was certainly a person who had certain mood swings. And when we were helping, I was one of the people who helped to put together the land book. She'd already worked it out. I mean, she's just getting input from other people. I'm not saying I was involved with the design at all at that level, but I realized that the darker pictures that she was taking up in the Highlands, particularly the very moody skies and so forth. Really, why did she do that? Was it a style that she was she following a particular approach? No, because she did other pictures which had a very different sort of tonal range in them. And I suspected that there was, when she took those pictures and when I asked her about it, she was really emotionally under the cosh, as it were. And one of the things she said about coming to the workshops back in the late 70s, she came on a Paul Capronegro workshop as a student. She said, what I found, not because these workshops or the people I was listening to taught me much about photography technically, which is why she came on workshops to start with. What I found, and I realized that photography is about ideas. And that was from a very well-educated individual who'd worked in publishing and so forth. And for her to realize that she could express something, and what she made and how she pursued her photography was a very personal journey. It wasn't exactly a revelation, but I think it was because we're so British, we don't actually want to show our emotions too much. And of course, there can be too much navel gazing. Of course, that's what I was accused of when I started doing my more personal work in the pre-notations in the 70s. But what else can you do, with photography other than to say something that is important to you? And you are really the important part. You are, unique. Who are you at the end of the day? You come into this world alone and you go out alone. And the journey in between is a very interesting and exciting one, but it's full of ups and downs. It's full of the important things about being human. And if we can't use photography to reflect our humanity and our humanness, what is the use of it?
Thank you, Paul. I think you're a poet at heart as well. There's a question here from Chris from Bridport, who says it's interesting that community photography took a dive in the second edition. Here we have a community lockdown project. We can't be unique. Do you welcome its return? And are there any recordings of the skiffle band?
No, sadly, no. I've got a photograph that I would quite happily share, but of us with the washboards and so forth. But yeah, but the community idea, I think, is right. What I was happy to be involved with, I wrote the foreword to and talked about it to a thing that LIP did, LIP, London Independent Photography. They did a thing on LIP Chronicles or COVID Chronicles. I forget what it was called. It's something like that. Anyway, I'd look it up. It'll be on their website, London Independent Photography. And that was, they are a community of photographers. We've created another Facebook community of photographers called Approaching Photography, which is a Facebook group, which is actually Maria's idea, and which I think is a good one. And a lot of people want to join. A lot of people want to share their work in this way. So what happens is that let's use these platforms. Let's not think that Zuckerberg is doing this and we're being manipulated to buy more stuff from John Lewis or whatever it is. Let's use it. Let's use the platform because it can get out. Let's use our phones because as phone cameras, because not only can we take pictures, we're always going to have our phone with us nowadays. Not only can we make pictures, but we can actually broadcast them instantly. We can make little books with the apps that you can have on phones. You can do all these things. Let's make the most of it. And social media and Facebook and other social media platforms can function in the same way. Of course, you have to be careful in terms of not it becoming too much of an echo chamber and that. But in some senses, I don't mind that. If people are interested in a particular subject, why don't they share their experiences, share their work, in this case, photography, with each other? And I know there's lots of photography groups, and there's one on photographic educators group, which is very good as well. And I think that what we found by then the few days that approaching photography group is the fantastic amount of work, which is brilliant, and ideas that are in photography and it's international. We're not just having people submitting things from the UK; they're from all over the world. So this is good because you're getting to see what's happening in other countries, other people's ideas, other cultures. So this is great. We are a community, whether we like it or not.
Thank you, Paul. There's one comment here which I'll read, and then I'll close for this evening. So it's from Carol Sartain, and she thanks you, Paul, for your talk this evening. She says, "It was lovely to hear you again. I will always remember the support you and Ed Bauman gave me and introducing me to Eggleston et al." So I think there's a compliment there for your teaching. So thank you, Paul, for telling us a bit about your career. I think we could probably have spent another 2 or 3 hours, and I wouldn't have had any problem listening for longer. And thank you for updating this edition of the book. Those of you that had the Zoom link, you'll find a discount code to get a copy of the book, or if you go to Paul's website, which is hillonphotography.com, I'm sure there's links there to it as well. So Paul, thank you very much. And I think I'll just end by just saying one final thing. Paul mentioned the Photographers Gallery and how he became involved in it very early on. Today is the very day, the 50th anniversary that the Photographers Gallery opened in 1971. So as you go away, I think raising a metaphorical or real glass of something to the Photographers Gallery and looking forward to their next 50 years would be a nice way to end the evening. So thank you, Paul, and thank you very much indeed to our audience for staying with us for an hour and a half this evening. Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Well, they've got nowhere to go.
Indeed.